Welcome to the second episode of COUG'D UP. This is a show where we're going to dive into the stories of Washington State student athletes and sports professionals who help define the sport to make this town special. I'm your host, Dylan Kiviat, joined behind the scenes, as always, by my producer, Will Glasby. You can't see him, obviously. Today, we have a very special guest, someone who has taken on one of the more legendary roles in Cougar athletics. He's a WSU alum, a Merrill College grad, and now the new voice of the Cougs. Welcome in Chris King. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Episode number 2. I'm honored, Dylan and Will. Appreciate you guys thinking of me for this and excited to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, if you want to kind of just introduce yourself and just for the audience, just for the podcast.
Sure. So very fortunate my first year as a broadcaster here at WSU. Kind of my background from Marysville originally, so a Washington native. Came here, proud Coug, was here from 2005 to 2009. And then kind of my path that led me back here ultimately is, always wanted to do broadcasting. Did my first game when I was in high school when I was 15. So fortunate in my high school, I went to Marysville Pilchuck, had a really good video production program where wired up the gym and did games live on the public access channel. So I was able to do my first game when I was 15.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
And just you get the taste of it and it's so much fun.
Yeah.
So did that and then came here. Had a great experience here, and then from there, worked for the Wenatchee Apple Sox, the summer collegiate baseball team in Wenatchee. After I graduated, I did one summer there, then after just the games, after I graduated, worked there, did the broadcasts for 2 more summers, but also worked full-time year-round doing communications and sponsorship sales, and then got the opportunity to get into on the college athletic side as far as with the school, and then went to Boise State, did women's basketball there, announced that for 2 years, and then came back to the Palouse and ended up at the University of Idaho, which worked out great. Was there for 11 seasons, did men's basketball, the last 3 falls, and then a spring season they had. So I did 4 football seasons when you factor in the one spring season at Idaho. And all during that time, for most of it, I did 9 seasons of minor league baseball in the Tri-Cities. And then Matt Chasnow, who is outstanding, awesome broadcaster, great guy, ended up taking an opportunity. I know it was a great fit for him and his family at North Carolina State. So this job came open. I certainly threw my hat in the ring, and I thank my lucky stars every day that it worked out where I was able to land it, and one football season in the books, and here we are as we talk today in the middle of hoop season.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that, WSU was able to bring you in, because obviously I don't think this show would have been possible if that didn't happen. But, yeah, so, what's it been since you, returning as a student, since you were a student at WSU, what's it been like returning to WSU, not as a student, but now as the voice of the Cougs? How is that different this time around?
It's been a blast. So I've been the opposing broadcaster before, and those were special opportunities. I've been the opposing broadcaster maybe a half dozen times for basketball between all the times that Idaho has come over to Pullman to play at Beasley against WSU. And then even one time I filled in as the Idaho State broadcaster. Their broadcaster couldn't make it up for men's basketball games, so I filled in there. And then I've been the opposing football broadcaster for the University of Idaho when they played at WSU in the opener of the 2022 season. So it's way more fun to be able to wear crimson and gray and to have this Cougar Head logo on and to be telling the stories from the WSU side. I mean, it means everything to me.
Yeah. So since you bring that up, since you were a broadcaster on the opposing side, I'm just curious because obviously we're students here. How was our crowd intimidating? How was that coming to Pullman or Martin Stadium? Or was it Beasley? You said it was Beasley you were at.
Beasley, yep.
Oh yeah, Beasley. How was that coming in as a visitor? Whereas now obviously you're the voice of the Cougs. How was that compared?
Well, it's funny. I was used to being a student for football games and a student for basketball games, so it definitely I just could look down and look into the stands and think about when I was there, cheering on the teams and my experiences as a student. So that was fun to think about, and certainly those were from the Idaho perspective. Those are always big opportunities to cross the border. So those were definitely fun games to call.
So, being the voice of the Cougs, obviously it's a job that carries a legacy here in Pullman. What does it mean to you to take on such I guess a prestigious role, such what does it mean to you? What's your meaning of, or what's your value of being the WSU, voice of the Coug announcer?
It means the world to me. So I have such respect for the tradition and the people who have had this job before. And so obviously you think of someone who's been the WSU broadcaster, the voice of the Cougs, you think of Bob Robertson. And I grew up listening to Bob. I have such incredible respect for Bob. And I had the good fortune of actually working with Bob on a couple of occasions and getting to know him a little bit, which I'm still just so thankful that I had the opportunity to do that. So Bob, not only a great football broadcaster, excellent basketball, but he loved baseball too. So yeah. Bob was a baseball player. So I got to sit down with him first in 2008. And his first job as a broadcaster, broadcasting for a team, was in 1949. I'm 99% sure of that. 1949 for the Wenatchee Chiefs, which is the baseball team of Wenatchee. Okay. So my first job announcing baseball with a team was with the Wenatchee Apple Sox, the baseball team of Wenatchee, in 2008. So actually that first year I was in Wenatchee, I reached out to him and I interviewed him about his experience back when he was in Wenatchee. So that's a lot of years in between, but interviewed him the first time for that, and then he would still help out and be part of the broadcast for the Spokane Indians when I was still with the Tri-City Dust Devils. So for a number of years, I would see him every summer, multiple times this summer, and one of the great honors would be that Bob would come over from the Spokane Indians booth over to the visiting booth when we'd play in Spokane. He came to the Tri-Cities maybe once or twice, but I'd mostly see him in Spokane. He'd come over and we'd visit, and I just cherished those opportunities to get to visit with him and to hear his stories and to hear his experience. And then on top of that, I was even able to do 2 broadcasts with him. So Mike Boyle, who's the Spokane Indians broadcaster, ended up having a conflict during the Northwest League playoffs one year. So I filled in for Mike, and with that, Bob was going to do 2 of the games. The first game was a rain delay. So there's no better person in the world to have a rain delay with and to be able to visit with than Bob Robertson. And then we did a game together in Spokane after that. And there was another year, the Northwest League All-Star game. Him and Pat Dillon did the broadcast, and then I was the on-field reporter. I was kind of in the dugout, so I got to work with him then. So just getting to know him a little bit was such a thrill. And then from there, getting to take on this job and just knowing that I know Bud Namick too, and I have a ton of respect for Bud, and then knowing Matt Chaz now as well. So just doing all I can to uphold everything that they've established and all the hard work that they put in. Yeah,
well, it seems like you were, from the get-go, you were surrounded by legends, and obviously, I'm sure that had a shaping in your broadcasting, your style, but I'm just, kind of building off that, I'm just curious, what first drew you to sports broadcasting? Was there, a defining moment? Was there, a moment in sports that just, it lit a spark in you and you wanted to, broadcast from that moment? What first drew you to sports broadcasting? I'm just kind of curious.
I wish I had a great answer. I would say that I love sports as long as I can remember. My older brother loves sports. My grandpa really loves sports. So just being around sports and seeing how do you get to be around this? How do you have an opportunity to have a job and be involved around this? And I certainly knew pretty early on I had no shot as a player at a high level. And so I think you match your passion with what maybe your personality is, and it's fun to tell people news. It's fun to tell hey, did you hear this? Yeah. There's kind of that aspect of it. And I think you kind of have to have that ingrained in you a little bit. So between that and loving sports, it was this is a slam dunk. So people do this? How do you get to do it? So I guess that was kind of always my path. But, really early on, as long as I can remember, if you asked me in elementary school, I would have told you I want to be a sports broadcaster. And then the rest of the path was trying to solve the puzzle of how do you turn that, how do you get an opportunity to do that? From how do you get an opportunity, how do you get paid to do that? How do you turn it from a gig into a job, and then a job into a career? That was kind of the nut to try to crack the whole time. So.
Right. Yeah. So I know you kind of mentioned you kind of had a broadcasting mentor growing up with Bob Robertson. But just curious, so was he your biggest broadcasting mentor growing up, or was there a particular I would say mine probably growing up was Vince Scully or Gary Cohen? Was there did you have a favorite broadcaster growing up?
Yeah. So I would say, Bob, I wouldn't say I knew him well enough. And I got to spend some time around him. And so I learned and soaked up from him. But I don't know, like, there are people I've spent a lot of time around that, like, I call maybe my true mentors. Like, I looked up to Bob and learned from Bob as someone, listening growing up. And all the really great broadcasters in the Pacific Northwest. Anyone who's, growing up in the Puget Sound area, all those guys you could hear, and I could rattle them off for you. But, but for me, like, my true, like, mentors, the people, like, really kind of helped to pave a way. When I was in high school, our video production teacher was Mr. Walsh, and he created the program that allowed me to first start doing our games. From there, I had a great friend named Chris Harper, who is a great mentor who really kind of took me under his wing, and he was into broadcasting and loved the craft of it and really helped me with that, and was such a big help to me. And then from there, other people, the owner of the Wenatchee Apple Sox has been great. Jim Corcoran, the Boise State broadcaster, Bob Beeler, who I had my first college job with, someone I think the world of, and has been so helpful to me. From there, in my time at Idaho, my boss named Tom Morris, and he used to do the broadcast. So that's certainly not everyone, but those are some people that come to mind who have been super, super influential and super helpful, because it's kind of a strange career to get into. There's not a lot of people who do it, and I try to do everything I can to help people who are interested, because it's so much fun and you have just this fire in your belly for it, that it's fun to share that with other people who have that same sort of passion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, I feel like, as someone, Will aspires to be a sports broadcaster too, but, similar to what you were saying, like, I feel like I've kind of like always had that, like, kind of like inner, like, feeling inside, or just like when I was younger, I kind of always knew I wanted to, like, go into, like, sports media, sports broadcasting. I mean, like, who doesn't want to be paid to talk about sports, especially at the biggest level, like, if you're calling, World Series game or like an NBA Finals game or Super Bowl game. And I mean, to me at least, and I'm sure to you, that's like the, it's like the dream. So, yeah, so kind of going back to, like, the kind of like pattern of your career. So, obviously you were working for the Wenatchee Apple Sox, you said, right, for a while. So, like, just curious, so what did each step of your journey, like, when you were broadcasting for the minor league baseball team, and then in your time with Idaho, and then with your time at Boise State, like, what did that teach you kind of as a broadcaster? Like, like evolving on your way before you got here, like, what did that teach you as a broadcaster?
I learned a ton. I would say, the biggest thing is nothing replicates reps. Like, nothing, like, I could talk till I'm blue in the face about, like, if we're just talking specifically play-by-play, like, we could talk till I'm blue in the face about theory, but nothing replicates actually doing it. So that's always what I pursued, was how do I do this, and then how does that lead to maybe the next door to open. So actually, when I was here at WSU, my kind of, what I carved out here is I got here as a freshman and had the opportunity where KJR in Seattle, the sports radio station, did a show called Varsity Football and Varsity Hoops Live. And what they would do Friday nights, I think it would start about 9:30 or 10, they would recap what went on across the state for the big, like, high school sports. So it was really a cool show because people could find out what was going on and get scores maybe before it was easy to get it on your phone. And at that point, they didn't have anyone covering Spokane. So basically for me, I was able to get like 5-ish, maybe 5 to 7 minutes, somewhere in that ballpark, of airtime on KJR. And I was like, great, I'll do it. So I would drive up. I didn't get paid. I would drive up from Pullman to Spokane every Friday night during my freshman year, and I would cover the biggest football game or cover the biggest basketball game. And then I'd call in and do this update on KJR. So it's a big thrill for me. Like, I grew up listening to that station, and being on the air in Seattle as a 18-year-old, 19-year-old was awesome. So I didn't get paid. Like, that cost me money. It was my own gas money going up there, and that was my Friday nights during my freshman year of college. But that was like, okay, like, this is how you get opportunities to do things. From there, the next year, they started doing, they being Comcast and now Xfinity, started doing games that they would put up on demand if you had their cable system in the state of Washington, where they wanted to have like a local presence. So they would do high school games. And so I started doing that in Spokane, and I would do both. So then I would drive up every Friday, sometimes more than once a week, to do volleyball and get paid to do games up. And so I'd wrap up with my classes here, drive up to Spokane. And I look back on it now, now that I have a son and then another kiddo on the way, thinking like, wow, I'm glad my parents didn't necessarily realize how bad the weather was at times, because we drove through some really bad roads and bad snowstorms and stuff.
I bet,
But I made it up and back. But that was so I got paid to do games. So that was for me. It was like I got paid to do games, and that's how I first started getting my reps. So that was the biggest thing, and I did that my sophomore year, my junior year, my senior year, and I'd still call in and do the KJR show. So I did have a pretty good body to work off of work by the time I graduated, and say, hey, you know, I want to do this or do this. Is just like, hey, I want whatever it took to do games. Like that was the biggest thing for me. Is like how do you get good at something, or how do you even know if you have a chance to be decent at something? You do it, and then you just do it, and you do it, and you do it. So that was kind of the biggest thing for me, especially when I was here, and then that kind of got me along my path after I left here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Yeah, you know, kind of like we were talking about earlier, I just feel like, you know, sports, it's just, you know, everyone wants to work in sports, you know, especially, you know, as a broadcaster, as a media personality, as whatever you offer to the table, you know. But kind of like building back on like the last question, you know, obviously broadcasting is a tough career. You know, what's like one of the toughest challenges you faced so far in your broadcasting career, and I guess like how did you like manage that and push through that?
Yeah, I'm smiling thinking about that. I mean, it's hard, like to have an opportunity to get a Division I college job, to get a high level job. Like there are very few people who don't have to make a ton of sacrifices, and this isn't a poor me thing, but you know, I went from working full-time year-round for the team in Wenatchee, and you know, was doing pretty good for just being out of college. And then, but when I pursued just doing play-by-play full-time, like when you looked at my taxes at the end of the year, it took a definite hit on salary. But for me, I wanted to be nimble, to give myself the best chance to do what I wanted to do, and to have the opportunities to be at the highest level. So I guess the challenge would be like balancing life, you know, my wife has been very patient and understanding and been very supportive. But if I came to her after, like we were married and I had a normal 9-to-5 job, and I said, you know, I want to pursue broadcasting now, probably wouldn't go over too well. Like it's just, there's a ton, like right now there's a ton of travel. Like I'm talking to the two of you right now about this, and it's a middle of a stretch of 6 straight weeks where you're traveling. There's a lot of travel, and there's a lot of, you know, non-traditional hours that go with it. It's the most fun job in the world. Like I can't imagine doing anything else. Like a lot of people want to do it because it's a ton of fun. I can attest it is as fun as it seems, but there's a give and take with that. Just the same way you look at, if you look at coaches, you look at Jimmy Rogers here at WSU, or David Riley, or we could kind of go down the list, Nathan Choate, like those, Cammy Etheridge has been fantastic. They're not here by accident, and they're not here because they work bankers hours, and that's no knock on bankers. Like you grind and you work non-traditional hours and you work long hours, but also not a second of it feels like work. So it is very competitive. I've lived that. It is super competitive, but it is a ton of fun too. So the toughest thing to balance, I guess, to come back would be, like, it is hard to navigate family stuff at times, and you know, your work-life balance when when I did minor league baseball, my first year was 76 games in 81 days. And then when I worked in Boise, I lived there just for the season. When I first started at Idaho, I lived there just for the season. So I lived in 3 different spots 4 different times out of the year to just like give myself in a position to do it at the highest level possible. So there is a lot of that does go with it. Yeah.
Well, like, you know, obviously kind of just like, you know, going off the basis of working in sports, like being such a tough career, like was there ever like kind of like a moment you were like, you know, you wanted to give up, or you were like, you know, like, hey, like maybe this is not the career for me? Like was there ever kind of like, you know, I guess just like kind of similar to the last question, but like, you know, a backbreaker to like almost in your career to like where like, I don't even know if I want to do this anymore, you know what I mean?
So the simplest answer would be no, because honestly, I think anyone who has that go through their mind at a serious level, they get out of it. I mean, that's just, it's too competitive. There's too many people that want to do it. The number of people who apply for, whether it's a minor league baseball job, these other jobs, it's like a staggering number of people who apply for these jobs from across the country. And it's because it's a ton of fun. But this is what I'm going to do. It's sort of like, not to say you're a comedian, but I mean, if you like say you become a successful comedian, you don't probably do that on accident. Like you're working on your set list. You're like failure's not an option. Not to say failure. Maybe you don't get to the highest level, but like this is what I'm doing. I'm going to put myself in the best position possible to hopefully have a shot to do it at the highest level possible. But at least for me, that was not. It was like, okay, this is what I'm doing, and then how do I kind of find a way to navigate everything else with it?
Yeah. So, as a just a sports fan and a broadcasting fan, I'm just curious, like, what has your favorite moment been so far? Like, as you were broadcasting game, like, what has your favorite moment been in your broadcasting career, like, so far?
I've had a lot of really neat ones, but I will say, the Apple Cup this year certainly stands out.
Oh yeah, especially because we won too. Yeah.
Yes, and how it had the dramatic ending and getting that big stop at the goal line and having it be my first Apple Cup, doing it and have the game in that way. So that jumps out. The Apple Cup, there were a lot of really fun moments from the football season. Heck, the way beating San Jose State in double overtime.
Oh, that game was ridiculous. I remember that game, yeah.
Kind of throttling Texas Tech. So a lot of really fun moments from this football season. This basketball season has already been a ton of fun, beating some really outstanding teams and having a strong record at this point when we talk. So in other moments, I did some no-hitters in the minor leagues. And then a lot of fun moments at Idaho for football and basketball. But I will say the Apple Cup was a pretty good one.
It's especially, not everyone is aware of Cougar culture, but the Apple Cup is like our Super Bowl. It's like that one game everyone circles on the calendar. Everyone's kind of looking for it, look forward to it. So, yeah, no, I get that. But, kind of like, obviously with technology evolving and the broadcasting world evolving, I'm just curious, like, what have you done to evolve as a broadcaster and adapt to like the always changing media landscape and just like, the always changing, like, uncertain career that you have?
That's an interesting question, and I think everyone has to evolve with it. 10 years ago, I wasn't doing a podcast. 10 years ago, the equipment that we'd use for broadcasts were a little different than we use now. Like, things change on that end. What I'm very fortunate to do now, and I hope doesn't change, and that, you constantly have to be evolving in how you prep, how you do everything else. My hope is that there's always a demand, and I think there will be, but we could cue this up 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and it'll be obsolete what I'm saying, is that you're at a big enough school like WSU where there's this passionate fan base where there's always going to be a demand for a WSU broadcast. So with that, like, I think the goal is when someone tunes into one of our broadcasts, whether it's myself and Craig Elo doing a basketball game, myself, Alex Brink, Justin McIntyre doing a football game, like someone tunes in and they know no one is going to know more about WSU than the people on that broadcast. That we're going to provide more insight. You listen to TV and there's nothing wrong with the TV broadcast. It's like a 10,000-foot view of the game. Like, we are in the weeds, crimson and gray wise. And the fact that it's not, I wouldn't call us like a homer broadcast per se. Like, we're more excited when something good happens for WSU, but we're also, we're telling the story from a WSU perspective, but we're also telling a factual, accurate story too of what's going on. Yeah, it's not like you're blinded by your homerism. So there's a lot of things to keep evolving, but having a Cougar broadcast where people can tune in and tune into the WSU, kind of point of view on things. I hope is that, will change in some ways, but that continues to remain just where there's this passionate fan base, where there's that demand for it.
Absolutely. So switching gears a little bit, I kind of like wonder, like what is the preparation like go about, like when you prepare for a game? Like, what does that like look like? Is it like, you have a dedicated like full week before you're calling a game that you're just nonstop looking at notes, or like how does the preparation go into before you call it football or basketball game or whatever?
It's different per sport, but football would be the most time intensive because there's the most number of people to keep tabs on. So what I do is I'm starting, in some ways you're starting now for next year, but I'll get started on the spring game here soon because there's been a lot of roster turnover for football and getting to have my arms wrapped around the new players that have come in for WSU. But on a normal game week, it definitely starts Sunday, and just I have a spotting board. It's through a service that kind of helps you compile it, but I will do my own notes with it. They'll kind of data scrape and do stats and height and weight and all that. But I'll go through and create all my own notes that get plugged into 4 11x7 sheets. And from there, I'll add even more notes to that. So you get the game notes from both teams. You dive into that. You're going back and watching both teams play. That's a big thing too, is like the identification part of it is like watching, especially the other team, but watching their film to be able to identify who's who. Because I'm out of practice all the time for WSU for football. Like I know who our guys are. Like that's my job to be there and to learn who they are, what they look like, all that, and to be able to identify them. Basketball, it is, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it is definitely easier than football where you have less people to account for, but it is digging into the story of both teams where they're at. I do a board. I take basically a folder, and it's 2 standard sheets of paper, but I have an Excel spreadsheet. So it's basically 4 columns of notes plus the stats of 12 players from both teams. There's a lot that goes with basketball too. And then baseball, since it's more of like the not every day at the college level, but the weekly flow that you're learning about those guys. It's very story based on baseball of like, okay, now we can weave in these stories and then learning about the opposing team. So I will say it's a lot of prep work. I mean, it is a lot of prep work, but that's what it takes to be ready and to walk into the booth or to walk into the seat courtside and feel like, okay, I'm prepared for whatever might be thrown my way. Because what I prep for, so little of that actually gets used on the air. I mean, so much of it's there in case you need it. Or, if this happens, then I know this piece of information. So you want to, I look at it, it's like an open book test. I want to go into an open book test with every possible note that I can have. It's an open book pop quiz.
That's a good way. Honestly, that's a great way to think about it. I mean, because obviously it's not like a real test, but it is because you're being tested on your knowledge. And, of course, you are able to look at notes and stuff. You can't just, it'll be obvious if you're, like, calling a game and you're just, you're, like, looking over your notes and reading over something and kind of hesitating. So, yeah, but, kind of building off, just, like, the broadcasting art itself, I'm just, like, curious, when you're working with, another co-partner, like, how do you deal with like dead airtime and like how does your communication go when you're calling the game with another broadcaster? Like how does that process go?
Thankfully, I mean, gosh, dead air hasn't been an issue, and that's because you work with great people, and then do everything I can to be prepared, and everyone I work with is super prepared. But a lot of it's nonverbal. So like for football, if I'm in the booth with Alex Brink, like I might say something and like physically like kind of like point to him or go like this, to reference in his direction. And then he can see when I'm done talking. And there's sort of a natural ebb and flow. The play-by-play broadcaster tells you what happens. The color commentator tells you why it happens. Yeah. And we're super fortunate with football. We have Jessamine McIntyre, who has been on the broadcast for over a decade. She does a fantastic job, and she's on the sideline. So she is, ready at any point. If something happens on the sideline, we know we can go down to her immediately, and she'll be ready. And then she's working on stuff, too, throughout the broadcast to have handy to add into it. So, and then on the basketball side, there's just kind of the natural ebb and flow of, okay, here's the play. Play happens, shot's good, shot's no good. Let's say shot's good. Then I say, Lawan Watts makes the basket, Cougs up 50-38. 11 minutes, 32 seconds to play first half. And then that's when I kind of go quiet, and then Craigie will jump in and maybe describe what happened on that play or give some analysis. And then, once it comes, the half-court offense is settled in, then that's when he kind of, transitions out, and then I jump back in. So there's kind of a flow to it. So,
But do you guys have, like, I guess, another question, like, do you guys have, like, I don't know, like, subtle sign or, like little, like, hand gestures or something to, like, indicate that, like, oh, like, I'm talking? Or, is there ever, like, any issues, like, with, like, you guys are talking at the same time or, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just communication issues or not really as much?
Not too much. I mean, if I'm done talking, then I'll look at in basketball, it can be a little harder to look at the partner But in football, I can because there's just more downtime. And then I can make like almost a hand gesture and reference them when I'm done. But it takes any time you work with a new partner, it maybe takes a little bit of getting used to. But I've been so lucky. The people I've worked with here are so good, and they've been so welcoming that I don't think there's been a ton of that. Like anything, chemistry of course is better at game 10 than it is 10 minutes into your first game, but they've done such a great job of helping me to get on board and to welcome me in that I feel like it's been pretty good.
Going back to your roots when you were calling college games versus, or sorry, no, I don't know why I said college. I meant like going back to your roots of calling minor league games versus, now your career calling college games. I'm just wondering what are the biggest differences you've noticed in the comparison of the level of play in college versus minor leagues?
So, I mean, the minor leagues is so unique in the fact that doing minor league baseball, I mean, those guys are professionals. They're all professionals. They all are being paid to be there, and some of them got paid extremely well. Where guys I would deal with at the level I was at, were pretty close to getting their signing bonus after signing, which could have been a very small amount to 7 figures and significant 7 figures. So that's just, those guys are professionals. So that's sort of different. And in college, I would say college versus high school, the best thing, and I love high school too. High school, I love the passion. I love telling good stories. That's what I want to do. I want to tell good stories. And when there's a game that's a fun story to tell, I want to be there. I want to be telling that. But there are more resources at the college level where there are sports information departments, and we're lucky to have such a great one here with Bill Stevens and Bobby Allworth and Jim Crawford and Riley as well on the women's basketball side, where they work really hard to put together game notes and to compile all this information to have that readily available for people broadcasting or fans who are just following along. So the challenge at the high school level, I might not have 5 or 6 stories about a player. I mean, just a 15-year-old sophomore who's averaging 8 points per game might not have the depth of the stories off the court at that point in their life that someone in college does. So it's fun to have those stories to be able to, I think of it as you're sprinkling it in. You have the calling the game itself is the base. Let's say it's your hamburger, but then all these stories, that's the bun, the lettuce, the ketchup, the mustard, the onions, the relish, whatever, the pickles, whatever else you want to put on it. And so that at the college level, it's easier to kind of sprinkle some stories and sprinkle a little bit extra on it because a lot of that stuff is available. And I love, there's some great stuff in the notes. I love learning things. That's part of my job, is to be present and to be around and to have open ears and to ask questions, to learn even more stories that might not be everywhere. They might not be in the notes, but they're great stories to be able to tell. That's how you source information. You're there, you're around, you ask questions, you build relationships, you build hopefully trust with coaches and players that you cover. So that's the goal there, and that's to me the biggest difference of the levels that I've been around.
Okay, yeah. So this is more kind of a personal question, but obviously it's still relating to your career and whatnot. But obviously you're broadcasting the game. You're live. You're calling the game. But I'm just wondering. Obviously you're still a fan too. Any broadcaster admits that they're a fan. I've heard plenty of broadcasters I don't know if you listen to Gary Cohen, because I'm a big Mets fan. He always talks about I know he's talked about how he's a fan at the end of the day. He's a broadcaster, but he's a fan. So. Just wondering, since you're still a fan at the end of the day, even though you're a professional broadcaster, what has been your coolest player interaction, so far, in your career?
Coolest player interaction. Let's see. I've really enjoyed some interactions, maybe with coaches and some people. The one thing about minor league baseball is you just never know who's going to be at the ballpark that day.
Oh, yeah.
You just walk into the ballpark. You just never know. So I've got to interview some Hall of Famers. One time, so the Tri-City Dust Devils, who I worked for, part of the ownership group when I was there was George Brett, and he had not been around my time there, but I had heard rumblings that when the team was in Spokane, he might be there. I should mention, too, Bobby Brett has been outstanding when talking about people who have been helpful and mentors. Bobby Brett is falls into that category as well. But no one told me specifically that he was going to come during the broadcast and join. The first I'd heard about it was I just heard from behind me be like, hey, this is our guy. And I looked around, and there was George Brett, and he sat down, and I handed him a microphone, and off we went on the broadcast together.
That's awesome.
Some other Hall of Famers, Fred McGriff, Tim Raines, and then on, let's see, some of the other, minor league baseball is unique in that way. You just never know who you're going to stumble into. And just some of the great Cougs that I've had the good fortune of getting to meet, that some I haven't met before, but getting to interact with as part of this job. It's just been awesome, whether it's been on the air or not on the air, like folks that you get a chance to visit with. It's been so much fun. There was another one too, that this was a fun story that I just really enjoyed. There was a baseball player for the Dust Devils, a guy named Brett Kennedy. He spent a little bit of time in the big leagues, a pitcher out of Fordham. And he was drafted, and at that point, the Dust Devils, their level was a lot of, like, if you were drafted out of college, this would probably be your first stop if you were playing for the parent club of the Dust Devils. And at that time, it was the Padres. This guy, Brett Kennedy, drafted out of Fordham, smaller school in New York, not necessarily pumps out a ton, some guys, but not a ton of guys. It's not like the equivalent of Vanderbilt, let's say, or some program like that. But Vin Scully went to Fordham. And so we were walking by the bus one day, and I said, hey, man, I was like, do you know who else went to Fordham? And he's like, well, who are you talking about? And I said, well, Vin Scully. He goes, as a matter of fact, he goes, he just called me the other day. I was like, really? What? Right. And so he goes, yeah. He's like, I got the voicemail. And so since Fordham doesn't produce a ton of guys, he was drafted out of Fordham, and Vin Scully saw that and wanted to reach out and congratulate him.
Oh, wow.
So Vin Scully asked to get his number through some connection, and out of the blue, this guy got a phone call, and I think it went to a voicemail. He let me listen to the voicemail, but he got this phone call from Vin Scully saying, like, hey, Brad, this is Vin Scully. Congratulations. You're making all of Fordham proud. Something along those lines. And he let me listen to it. So that, like, when I talk about your sourcing information and stories, like, that's from being around guys and just saying hi and asking a question. And I don't know if that story would have come up with anyone else otherwise, but I loved telling it on the air because I thought it was such a cool story for him.
Really cool. Well, Vin Scully probably, arguably he's undoubtedly one of the best broadcasters of all time. But, I think Vince is a pioneer of, like, really diving deep into, like, play-by-play, obviously I remember, because I'm a diehard Mets, I remember his 1986 call, gets by Buckner, down the line, gets by Buckner. Like, you hear it on the radio, and it's almost like you're there because he gives so much detail, It rolls down the line. It gets under his glove. He he looks to his, what I mean? It's, like, so descriptive. It's, like, actually, like, Vince Scully obviously was a, talent of his own. But, kind of keeping it, on a personal level, like, what are your, like, obviously you're a student here in Pullman. Like, what are your, like, some of your favorite spots in Pullman?
Oh, interesting. Some of my favorite spots in Pullman.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Well, this building we're in, I have so many good memories here between Murrow and Jackson and Gertson. I loved going to football and basketball games. And the time I was here, and Alex Brink was the quarterback when I was here. So it's fun to get to work with him now after having, been a student and watching not quite all of his career, but the vast, vast majority of his career. And I told him, too, I think when I interviewed for the job, that because he'd won 3 Apple Cups, no one has won more Apple Cups as a Cougar quarterback than Alex Brink, telling him I was there in person for 2 of them. I was there the 2 that he won in Seattle in 05 and 07. But I have so many great memories, not only at Giesa Field, but in Beasley as well. So my timing, I was here for Dick Bennett's last year into all 3 of Tony Bennett's years. And it went from, not huge crowds at basketball to basketball being bonkers and going to the Sweet 16. So being able to experience that as a student and be around when the program was rolling to that degree was awesome. And then now I live here with my family. It's funny, like I lived up kind of like apartment land, and for most of my college time, and I hardly ever go over there now. Like, I'm hardly ever at that part of town, and I live in a part of town up on Pioneer Hill where I hardly spend any time as a college student. So even though I'm, like, in the same spot where I was in college, it's sort of 2 different worlds.
Explore different spots.
It's 2 different worlds a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Well, like, as a college student, like, Pullman's just, like, it's like weird because it's like it's such a small place, but like at the same time there's such a good community, and there really is like I feel like the essential stuff you need. You know what I mean? So, coming from at least my perspective, coming from like a bigger city, it was definitely like more of an adjustment for me. But yeah, no, I feel like we got lucky last year because we got to see the men's basketball team make the tournament, and I was actually. I was calling the games for COUG'D UP radio just for fun. And I was literally saying like in January, February, I was like, you know what? Like this team is like, they have some kind of special camaraderie, some kind of special chemistry that you can, as a fan, you could really, notice. And I was just, it was just great to see them like, evolve throughout the season and make the tournament for the first time since, 2008 they made the tournament. So, we got lucky with that. Will, I'm sure you remember. I'm sure you were there for a lot of that. Yeah, but kind of wrapping things up a little bit, obviously me and Will are aspiring sports broadcasters. So, what advice would you give to aspiring broadcasters like myself and Will and anyone else who is trying to go into the industry?
Say the big things is get reps at whatever you want to do. Sports media as a whole is kind of a crazy business, and it's an ever-evolving one. I'd say what I do specifically is pretty narrow. But anyone who's going into it, and even play-by-play to a degree, like you can create your own job. Like you got to hustle though. Like maybe the job that you think about, a lot of these jobs. Think of it like Adam Schefter, like being an insider and a scoop person. Like 20 years ago, a little bit of that, but not the way it is now. That job was kind of created. Like there's these, like a lot of these jobs kind of get created, but like you kind of can chart your own path. But reps, I would say reps, be around good people, find good mentors, but reps, and you got to want it. I mean, like you really got to, it's like, it is, people who want to do this, we're a dime a dozen. Like I say that as no insult to myself. I'm a dime a dozen. Like it's not like there are people who have very important jobs that are so crucial and so specific that it's like, oh, if that person wasn't around, who would fill that job? Like if I wasn't like, tomorrow, if I went away or something, they would have no lack of people to fill my job. Like I understand that. I'm very grateful for the job I have because it is something that people have fun doing. So that'd be the big thing. Get reps at what you do. Chart your own path, try to create your own way. I mean, when I was in school here, people who were writers, like you'd be a newspaper writer. Well, now a lot of people have their own outlets, where you have your own subscribers, and if you're in sports, you wanted to be a sports columnist, and that does still exist some degree, but you have to be at like a legacy outlet for that to happen. But there's a lot of people who have charted their own way and say, I want to cover this team, and I want to cover them so specific that I want to charge and make my living just off the people who are so hungry for this content, for this specific thing. So keep doing it, keep plugging along. No, it is a long, hard road. Like it is not necessarily, I don't know anyone working in sports media that does not work long hours. I was back this last year at the National Sports Media Association Awards, and it's just this, I've been back there twice for that, and it's just great experience to be around all these outstanding people in sports media who do it at the highest levels. And even talking to people who don't do play-by-play, like these people sacrifice a lot. They work crazy hours. They are whip smart. There's a lot that goes into it. So I would just say, no, it's not easy, but also no, it's as fun as it seems.
Okay, yeah. So kind of transitioning a little bit, final comments. Looking ahead. Okay, no, sorry, I messed that. You're gonna have to cut that, Will. But looking ahead, like, what's your vision for like the future of WC sports broadcasting, and what do you hope to accomplish during your time here?
I would say that I'm excited to have my first year where you get to experience these things for the first time. It has been outstanding. I'd also like to give a big shout out to Jerry Kylo, who's the engineer, who is like a technical whiz, and he is like the reason things sound so good. And he is such a fantastic engineer for the WSU side. So, I mean, what I would say is, I'm where I want to be. I'm so lucky to be here, to hopefully continue to get better and better, to build. I think a lot of that is building relationships, and relationships take time. So continue to build those relationships. On that front, looking forward to getting to know the new football staff. And then, gosh, just excited about what the future holds. The new Pac-12 will be here soon, and looking forward to being along for the ride for that. And I just think that to me, there's no better fan base than WSU. Go Cougs is a universal language. The Cougar head logo crosses borders. You could be anywhere in the world and get a Go Cougs.
I've experienced that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so there's just no place I'd rather be, and I'm thankful to be here.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It was a pleasure hearing about your journey and insights as a sports broadcaster. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share? Where people can follow you or stay updated on your work or anything?
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you for having me. I appreciate you thinking of me. As far as following the work, tuning into the broadcasts, I would say, obviously, we have the whole broadcast network that ranges from not only here locally in Pullman to Spokane, across a good portion of the state. Our games are carried in Seattle as well. An easy way to follow along is the Varsity Network app. That's free. You download the Varsity Network app, and you can listen to any of our broadcasts live or on demand. We have our coaches shows, which are a ton of fun. They stream those also on Facebook Live and then afterwards on YouTube. That's kind of the biggest thing as we talk here today. Just here we go, the rest of the hoop season. Excited to see how the team can finish out. Yeah. And then on to baseball season. Then we're talking spring football, and then it's started the 2025 football season.
It's like a nonstop cycle, just repeating sports. But make sure you follow Coug'd Up on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so you never miss an episode. Also, check out our YouTube if you want to see the video version of every single episode we do. Also, find us on Instagram or Twitter at Coug'd Up. For live updates, behind-the-scenes footage, and highlights from every episode. Also, if you're interested in joining us here on the show or have any questions or suggestions for future guests, just send us a message on our socials. This has been another episode of Coug'd Up. My name is Dylan Kiviat. As always, shout out to my co-host, Will. Will's done a great job. And go Cougs.